Springs Eternal. All right, so that's going. And people are starting to join. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are starting our live feed to Facebook, and we'll get our presentation started in just a minute. Hope everyone's doing well this evening. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. The adventure of starting the live feed. Okay. And we are now live on Zoom and Facebook. Thank you all who have joined us this evening. We are very excited to have a guest speaker with us from outside all of scouting. And it is going to be a lot of fun to hear Dr. Michael Brennan share his knowledge about underwater archaeology. Mike is a maritime archaeologist with Search Inc., located in Jacksonville, Florida. Mike has a Ph.D. in oceanography from the University of Rhode Island and his MA and Bachelors in archaeology. He worked with Dr. Robert Ballard, who discovered the Titanic in 1985, through graduate school, and after as an expedition leader and Director of Marine Archaeology for his Nautilus exploration program. In this role, Mike led Deepwater missions to the Black and Mediterranean Seas, Gulf of Mexico, and Pacific Coast of California. At Search, he has led projects at the Bikini Atoll and the Marshall Islands, and was the archaeologist on board for the oil removal and pollution risk migration of the World War II oil tanker shipwreck MT Coimbra. Mike, how are you this evening?
Hey, good, thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. That summary is actually quite good. I'm going to touch on all of that a little bit. Basically, what I'm going to do today is give kind of an overview of Deepwater archaeology, what I've done for the research vessel Nautilus as Dr. Ballard's graduate student. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more recent work that I've been doing at Search. I'll apologize in advance for any awkwardness. I'm used to giving these talks in front of audiences that I can see, but it's all good. We're all doing well, I hope, in these strange times. So I'll just move on. So I need to start, of course, by referencing Titanic, because despite being the most famous shipwreck in the world, it also paved the way for deepwater archaeology. When Titanic sank, people pretty much thought, well, it's gone forever. We're never going to see Titanic again. And so in 1985, when Ballard discovered Titanic, he basically was able to tell the world through that act that ships are not lost forever. You know, they may be very difficult to reach, but we have this massive luxurious ocean liner now as a shipwreck in the very deep ocean, about 3 miles deep. So at the time in 1985, they used the latest deep water technology, which was a camera sled. So it was basically aluminum and titanium cage that had a series of cameras in it, and they towed it behind the research ship at very deep depths. They had a lot of lights, and they pretty much looked at the video as they were going in a survey pattern to find the wreck. But as I'll show you today, we've come in deepwater operations and the technologies that we have to find and document shipwrecks in deepwater. This is one good example. This is the Bow of Titanic. This was from a survey in 2010. It was an expedition that was done by NOAA and other partners, and they use AUVs, which are autonomous underwater vehicles, to use sonar and cameras to map and then also take enough hundreds and thousands of photos to stitch together into large photo mosaics. So this here is actually the photo mosaic. No, I'm sorry. This is the sonar image of Titanic from the AUVs. And when Ballard came back from discovering Titanic, what he had, which surprised him even more than finding the wreck, was that he had thousands of letters from kids who were all asking to go on his next expedition. And I like to say that my letter was one of them, but I was only 4 at the time, so I didn't actually send a letter. It was a couple of years later that I did. So what he did was he developed the idea of telepresence, and he used this for deep sea exploration, though it has quite a few other applications. So the live broadcast of expeditions, doing active research through satellite technology to schools, museums, aquariums, other science centers. Telepresence today, you can actually go online and watch some of this stuff. Nautilus Live and NOAA's ocean exploration portal or ocean explorer portal will allow you to watch these expeditions live and listen to the scientists as they're talking about what they're looking at and even ask them questions. So it's come a long way, but it was because of Titanic and all the interest of kids asking to go on the next expedition that Ballard decided, rather than bring them on the next expedition, he would bring the expedition to them, because ships just aren't big enough to house thousands of kids. So in 2008, while I was a graduate student, Ballard brought the research vessel Nautilus online, and we began exploring the Aegean and Black Seas in the Mediterranean area. They then migrated across the Atlantic to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, and now they're working in the Pacific. From this research vessel, we launched 2 ROVs, Hercules and Argus. Some of you may have seen these images online. Basically, Ballard's early design for ROVs in the late 80s was Jason and Medea. And Jason, or the current ROV is Hercules, is basically the fine tool. So it's able to stay close to the seabed and use its manipulator arms to excavate and to pick up artifacts and do very detailed work, while Argus is the eye in the sky that it's similar actually to the tow sled and the camera system that found Titanic. It has mostly cameras and lights in a steel or in a titanium cage. And so it provides an eye in the sky. And in addition to that, it's heavy, so it's weighted down so that the motion of the ship is taken away. So as Argus is moving like this, because the ship's bouncing in the waves, Hercules is tethered to it. So the tether takes up that motion and Hercules isn't pulled around by the bouncing of the ship. And then after the video feed comes from the ROVs, it's brought to the ship and broadcast through a satellite and then downlinked to everybody else on shore. Hercules, as I said, can conduct careful examination and work such as artifact retrieval without worrying about breaking artifacts while the ship's bouncing it around. So from 2008 until 2012, we explored the Mediterranean and Black Seas, particularly the coast of Turkey, which is the landmass that you see on the right. Above that is the Black Sea, where we did quite a bit of work. And we also worked down to the bottom right, which is the Mediterranean coast of southern Turkey. And in that time, we found over 50 undiscovered ancient shipwrecks, which was a larger number than we expected. We kind of got the pattern down of figuring out where they would have sank and mapping a lot of those areas, so we were able to find them. So kind of begs the question as to, what an ancient wooden ship would look like years on the seafloor, because when you see something like Titanic and you it still looks like a ship. It's battered, it's rusted, it's kind of crumpled a little bit, but it still looks like a ship. Wooden ships, that's not really the case. So for ancient ships, you end up seeing a pile of ceramic artifacts, and that's because most of these ships were carrying cargo, which are these ceramic vessels called amphoras, or holding olive oil or wine, and that's what they were shipping all over the ancient world. And so that's kind of what we look for when we try to find an ancient shipwreck. This is a photo mosaic similar to the one of Titanic that we collect hundreds of images with the looking straight down with the ROV, and then a computer stitches them together based on similarities in the images. And then we have this kind of bird's eye view of the plan of the wreck and how things are oriented. So you can see that this is kind of an oval shape, and that's because the ship would have sunk with the hull like this, and then as the wood decayed, the pile of the artifacts that were stacked in the hold kind of collapsed and became this ovoid shape. Another image of that, oh sorry, this one is from the late Roman, early Byzantine era, so it's about 500 AD. And these came from the Near East, near Cyprus. This one is an image from the ROV of what these look like. These are more heart-shaped, smaller amphora from the medieval period, so more like 1000 AD. And so these ovoid piles of these ceramic artifacts are really what we're looking for when we're looking for ancient shipwrecks. While we were doing a lot of that work, one of the major observations we made on almost all of these wrecks was that there was a lot of damage by bottom trawl fishing. If you guys don't know what that is, a lot of the seafood that you get is caught not by fishermen with a line and reel, but by weighted nets that are dragged over the seabed, and they pull up fish, crabs, shrimp, and pretty much anything that's on the seabed. They don't really care what's there. If it's in their path, they're going to pull it up in the net. We've documented damage to shipwrecks from trawls quite a bit. These are nets from trawls hung up on a shipwreck off of Vancouver called the Coast Trader that was sunk in World War II. You can see the nets all over it and fish kind of piled up inside it. You can see some of the weights from the trawls that are impacted against the hull. This is again Coast Trader. It's actually a wreck that they are worried about it spilling oil because it sank with pretty much full fuel tanks. And so you can imagine that striking the hull of a rusting ship might have an oil spill someday. But with ancient ships, this is an illustration of kind of what it looks like. So these weights are called trawl doors, and they'll smash their way through anything that's on the seabed as the ship tows it behind. And so you can see how it would carve its way through a pile of fairly fragile ceramic artifacts. So while this shipwreck had been in equilibrium with the marine environment for centuries, these trawls come by and kind of smash their way through it. It's not anything intentional, of course. So we were just trying to document the damage, but it is unfortunate. One thing that we were discussing is how we could maybe establish marine protected areas for areas that have a high density of ships to keep this from happening more. But this is what it looks like afterwards. After many passes by trawls, they used to be meter high piles of intact amphoras that, like we saw on the previous slides, and now they're pretty much the disintegrated hull is now that former shape is now smashed and strewn across the seabed. And you can see here there's very few artifacts that are still intact. Most of them are just pieces. And this is one off the Mediterranean coast of Turkey. This is another photo mosaic of one of the wrecks in the Black Sea. You can see there's more elongated pieces of wood in here because the Black Sea has very little oxygen, so the wood stays preserved longer. But you can see kind of going top right to bottom left, there's these long sweeping pattern, and that's because trawls have gone across this site. On the middle right, you can see that there's a piece of wood there. That's actually the mast, which was not on the site when it was found in 2000. and this is from 2011. So 11 years later, at some point, a trawl had gone by and dug the mast out of the seabed, and it's now upended on the site. So you can see we were able to document quite a bit of this damage. And I've mentioned photomosaics a few times, so I want to talk a bit about what a photomosaic is. So the ROVs that we use, such as Hercules, will do a sort of a gridded pattern over a shipwreck site, and it'll take, you can see here the red and the blue, that's like the footprint of where the photograph would be. And it makes it uses multi-beam sonar, stereo cameras, and a painted laser line along a very tight gridded pattern to do these surveys. And so it gets very stable, very well known, like precise positioning information for the navigation. So it's able to stitch all this back together. So we were able to do this for a lot of the wrecks. So we looked at ancient shipwrecks and modern. This is one from about 1900. We think that the back half had blown apart, possibly some kind of coal explosion. It might have been a war, like a bomb had gone off, but we think it was more likely some kind of explosion internally. But this is what sonar can get you. So it's called multi-beam because it shoots out multiple beams of sonar at the same time. And it gives you very detailed bathymetry of things underwater from the ROV rather than using it from a ship. So this is one of the wrecks that we found in the Black Sea. Back to the very artsy photo that I showed in the first slide. This is a ship called Dionysos, which was sunk in a storm off of Turkey in 1956. We found it by accident while we were doing a sonar survey for ancient shipwrecks off the coast of Turkey in the Aegean. It's right between Turkey and some of the Greek islands. And actually through telepresence, because we were on Nautilus at the time, I was able to connect with the grandson of the captain who died when the ship sank. And he was very excited to know that, we'd found the site of the ship that had been in his family and operated by his family. But you can see in the top left, that's another sonar image from the survey done by the ROV of this whole ship sitting on the seabed. When Nautilus moved to the Gulf of Mexico for 2013 to start the 2013 field season, we worked on a couple of shipwrecks there called the Monterey. They were discovered in 2012, and we went and did more detailed mapping and some small scale excavation and artifact recovery in 2013. We think it was probably a privateer and its prizes. So there were two other wrecks nearby. This one had cannons on it. Two did not, and that was unusual. So we think that it's possible this ship was escorting the other two with their cargoes after seizing them, and they all probably sank in a storm. You can see this is an image from Argus, the Eye in the Sky ROV, and you can see how it's a little blurry. But if you look at this one, this is our photo mosaic, which is made up of hundreds of images, photographs from the ROV looking straight down and stitched together. You can see how clear and detailed, if you were to zoom in, these maps are. So you can see on the left, there's an anchor. In the middle, that's one of the big cannon, and there's a stove, that's the square box. And then on the right, you can see there's some of the cargo, some jars that would have contained water for the crew and that sort of thing. We used navigation transponders deployed on the seabed for this, so the ROV knew where it was at all times. And we actually remapped the wreck once a day to see what we were changing on it. We did a pre-disturbance survey. So before we touched anything, we did a map. And then every day while we were working, we did that so that we could see the stages of what we did to change how the site looked throughout the week that we were there, and document what we moved, what we changed, and what we removed from the site. And that's something that we do as archaeologists quite a bit, is document not just what's on the site, but also our disturbance of it, so that we can make sure that we're being good stewards of the past and good stewards of the environment as well. We did this for a shipwreck found in the Black Sea called the Regla E, based on the town that it was found off of. And one of my colleagues did what we call change detection. So we did a bathymetry survey with the sonar of the wreck 11 months apart. We found it in in 2011, then went back in 2012. And it had been hit by trawls quite extensively in between. We actually found in the video that there were what we believe are human bones from a Greek sailor on this ship, because it's from about 300 BC in the 2011 footage. And when we went back with the for those bones, they were missing because the trawls had ripped them from the site. And so on this larger map, the red is material that was missing in the next survey, and blue is area that had there had been material that was added. So you can see we basically subtracted one from the other, and you can see how much damage trawls had done to the site in 11 months. And so that was another good use of our repeated attempts to map what was going on at these sites, so we could have comparisons between the work that we were doing. Another couple of cool examples of some of these surveys, a sonar and photo mosaic. So this is a U-boat sunk in the Gulf of Mexico, a U-166, sunk in 1942 off of New Orleans. We did a multi-beam image of mapping image of it, so you can still see the conning tower and the gun, and then the bow that's sort of starting to collapse a little bit on the left there. One of the really interesting ones is the USS Macon was a airship or a blimp that sank in the 40s. I'm sorry, in the 30s, off of Monterey, California, and it's a known site. It's part of a protected area off of California, but you can see this is a photo mosaic, and it doesn't really look much like an airship anymore. But if you look on the bottom right, you can start to see the imprint of the nose cone from the decaying aluminum structure. You can kind of see it. Normally, if I were in person, I would be pointing this out on a screen, but hopefully you can see it. It's on the bottom right. You can just kind of see the nose cone spiraling out in the photo mosaics. You can see that's kind of where the blimp crashed down and then decayed on the seabed as the aluminum started to deteriorate. While I've been working at Search in my more recent work, Dr. Jim Delgado and I have participated in a lot of NOAA and BOEM expeditions. Those are federal agencies. And we've been working on conducting mapping operations through processing comprehensive video data rather than using photos. And you can even get sort of a bathymetry look at the wreck in 3D with just using video based on the angle of the video. And this is an example of how they would use the ROV to get coverage of all of the artifacts. This is an example of a 19th century shipwreck off of North Carolina called the Blake Riddrick. And this is an example of kind of the final processed version from the video. This is similar to the Monterey wrecks. It's a 19th century ship in the Gulf of Mexico. This is the bow section, and you can see again the anchor and the stoves and some of the artifacts that are on this wreck. We're actually planning an expedition to return and complete the map. They didn't have time to do the full documentation of the stern half, so we're hoping to get back there in the next year or two and finish that documentation. We did photo mosaics through the video of the USS Independence. This is, so rather than looking straight down with the cameras on the ROV, we're looking at the video that's coming in from the side and then with the software. So you can see doing this on just basic survey footage and not a planned mapping exercise. You can see there's some gaps in the video coverage, but we get a pretty good look at, this is the bow of the aircraft carrier USS Independence that was sunk off San Francisco in the late 40s after it was used as a target at Bikini Atoll nuclear test there. So what this teaches us is, we thought we did a good job documenting everything, but we could actually do better. So we're gonna sort of make some protocols and get some plan in motion to do these surveys in even more comprehensive ways. This is just a cool image of the stern. You can see Independence, the words on the stern of the ship. And this wasn't a photo mosaic. This is just a photo that we were able to get. Dr. Delgado, he's in the middle seat there. we were on board Nautilus for the Independence dives, and we were able to document or direct the ROV pilots in documenting the ship to a great extent. But we've also done it remotely through exploration command consoles in Rhode Island and in Washington, D.C., and that's part of telepresence. We don't need to have all the scientists on board the ship anymore. We've actually directed entire missions, entire dives from the comfort of our office in Jacksonville or a location near our home. And people have even done it on their cell phones and they're watching videos that are coming in on Nautilus Live or the Ocean Explorer portal for NOAA. I just want to return real quick to Titanic. In the 2010 expedition that I talked about at the very beginning, they used AUVs to do photomosaics. And it was the first autonomous underwater vehicle mapping of a shipwreck of this size. And it produced some of the best and most comprehensive photomosaics of the site. You can see this is the bow here, obviously. And at the stern section, it was similar to what we did on Independence. They overlaid the video footage with their sonar map, and they could see the gaps. So you can see the stern here on the left, and the circular objects on the right. Those are some of the boilers that spilled out. But you can see there's still some areas that they did not capture with their video surveys. So again, we may be flying around watching their ROVs, but in terms of comprehensive survey, we can still do a lot better. Some more recent discoveries that you may have heard of was the Paul Allen's Vulcan group and their research vessel Petrel found some World War II shipwrecks in the really deep, such as the USS Indianapolis, which was, of course, sunk by a Japanese submarine when it was delivering the nuclear bomb to Tinian before it was brought over to Japan. And they found quite a few of these wrecks. They found in Indianapolis, the aircraft carriers Wasp and Hornet, the destroyer Juno, and others that have been missing in Deepwater for quite a while. They've had a, excuse me one sec. The Petrel operations had a very high rate of discovery at greater than 4,000 meters depth. So we're talking like 3 miles below the surface. And there's still only just highlights of these videos. We haven't had a chance to see the full comprehensive video, but they've been doing a really good job at documenting a lot of these sites in high resolution. You can see the main part of the Indianapolis is down at the bottom left, but the torpedo blew the bow off, which is at the top right. So you can see what these AUVs and how they're able to map the entire landscapes really make discovery and documentation of sites that are in deep water a lot more feasible. Another ongoing project that we've been working on at Search is locating and documenting PPW wrecks, which are potentially polluting wrecks. A lot of these are oil tankers that were sunk during World War II because German U-boats targeted American shipping to the Allied forces, particularly England, over in Europe. So there were a lot of submarines patrolling the Atlantic and trying to prevent those resources from getting to England. So a lot of tankers carrying oil were sunk, and now 75-ish years later, they're in these rusting hulks. There's some threat of that oil leaking. This map was made when Nautilus explored the wreck of the freighter Alcoa Puritan in the Gulf, which is one of the potentially polluting wrecks. I think it had a cargo of aluminum, but it carried a lot of fuel on it as well. So it wasn't an oil tanker, but the pollution threat comes from its own fuel resources. This is a map of the estimated shipwrecks off of the United States. And as you can see, there are a lot of them. Many of these, especially the ones in deep water, haven't been found. So it's just kind of a estimated position based on where they think it sank. And NOAA did a good job in the early 2010s of narrowing down which ones might be a pollution threat. So there's quite a few here. The red means it's a high threat. The green means it's not as high of a threat. They narrowed it down to 87 of them. There are a couple, such as the Fern Stream, which I believe was up in San Francisco, and City Service number 4, which are already mitigated. They pumped out some of the oil that was on board to try to keep it from leaking. And as Josh mentioned at the beginning, I was the archaeologist on board 2 summers ago when we worked on the MT Coimbra off of Long Island, which had started to leak. And I'll talk about it in a minute, but we actually were able to pull quite a bit of the oil off of it to prevent that oil from spilling out. Public attention to oil leaks went as far back as the 1960s, and we think that Coimbra had actually been leaking since 1942 when it was sunk. This is an ROV image from the Coast Trader, which I showed had the trawl nets hanging on it previously. It costs tens of millions of dollars to pump out oil from those other wrecks that I mentioned. And when we looked at Coast Trader and City Service number 4, we determined that they're actually at low risk of leaking after we were able to evaluate it based on how corrosion's working on the rivets, and if we think that there's oil that are kind of left in the tanks, looking at the tank, the integrity of the hull. So we were able to spend maybe tens of thousands of dollars to get our expertise out there to look at these wrecks, rather than tens of millions to pump it out and find that there wasn't very much oil on board after all. Recently, a German battleship that's capsized at Kwajalein after Bikini Atoll nuclear tests, the Prinz Eugen, it sank in 1946, and the Navy actually recently pumped about 200,000 gallons of oil out of it because it had started to leak. So this is an active problem, and it's one of the reasons that we've been pushing for exploration, because the only way that you're going to be able to mitigate pollution threats from these wrecks is if we find them. And if you think about that map that had all the yellow dots of all the shipwrecks that are thought to be in American waters, most of those have not been found. And if some of these are sunken oil tankers that the fuel cargo is about to leak through corroding hulls, if we have never found those wrecks, we're not going to know where the oils come from, or even have a chance to prevent the leak if it is going to happen. So there's a couple of these that we're working on. The W.D. Anderson sank off of Florida. This is a multi-beam image of it. We know where the wreck is. We haven't gotten out to take a look at it yet, but it's on the list. We're hoping to dive it in the next year or two. And then Bloody Marsh is another one that it was sunk with almost its full cargo capacity full of oil, which is like 102,000 barrels of oil. It's a large amount. Now, this one was believed to have broken in half when it was torpedoed. So chances are a lot of that oil spilled in 1942 when it sank, but there's a good chance that there's quite a bit of it still remaining on board. So we're hoping to get out to these sites in the next year or two and take a look and see if we think there's still oil that's in danger of leaking. Now, as I've mentioned a couple of times, the Coimbra is a British ship that was sunk in 1942 off of Long Island, and we used a multi-agency team to evaluate the site and determine what areas still hold oil. We had Navy divers or commercial divers down on the overturned hull, drilling, tapping into the hulls, and then they actually pumped over 500,000 gallons of cargo lube oil and bunker fuel oil from the wreck over the course of, I think, 3 months. On site. So it was a huge effort, but it had been leaking, and when storms came by, it would kind of, more oil would come up, so they knew that there was still more down there. So it was a good thing that we did that, because if something had happened and the hull kind of gave way catastrophically, you were going to have those 500,000 gallons washing up on Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod and all the other beaches. One thing that we do when we dive with the ROVs on these wrecks is look at a visual method of corrosion and hull integrity with the ROV. So if you see under the E in Coast Trader, sorry, I can't see where I'm pointing, there's a red dot, and then down to the right is another red dot. That's 10 centimeter scale. Most ROVs are equipped with these now. So the lasers are set at 10 centimeters and point straight out. So whatever we're painting the lasers on, that's a 10 centimeter scale. And so we're able to use those to look at the corrosion with, see if stuff is corroding badly and if the rivets are in danger of leaking. You can see in some places there's quite a bit of metal corrosion, and other sites we determined that it wasn't really that bad. So it's one of the things that we use to gauge pollution risk. One of the other projects I was really fortunate to get to work on at Search was in the summer of 2019, I got to go out to Bikini Atoll, which is in the Marshall Islands, which is the site of two of the early nuclear tests on a Navy fleet. The first one, Test Able, was detonated 500 feet in the air. And the second one, which is shown here, is Test Baker, which is detonated underwater and basically irradiated a whole column of water that washed over all of the other warships and sank some. And then the rest of them were too hot to reboard. So a lot of them, like the USS Independence, the aircraft carrier I talked about earlier, was so badly irradiated and damaged that after being towed back to San Francisco, they had to scuttle it off the coast. And that's what we were documenting over there. So the Navy and the National Park Service documented a lot of these wrecks in the late 80s, but no one had ever looked at a comprehensive, on a comprehensive scale, the full lagoon bottom and all the debris and vessels that were sunk there. So we went out there for a sonar survey. We used the little boat that was tied behind the big boat to run a multi-beam sonar, and we were able to entire area of the lagoon bottom where the ships were moored. We were able to look for things like aircraft and trucks and debris, and then we dove a little bit on some of these wrecks and documented some more of it. What was really fascinating, though, is that our sonar image of the lagoon bottom really brought to life the crater punched into the seabed by the so you can see this sort of Sauron staring up at you. It's a good 60 feet, I think, in depth from the rest of the lagoon bottom. And these are the other wrecks. So Saratoga is an aircraft carrier. Arkansas is a battleship, and some of these others are pilot fish and is a submarine. Sakawa is a Japanese destroyer. You can see it on the edge of the crater. So it sank when Able was set off, and then when Baker was set off, it punched it into the seabed. So it's fairly crumpled. So we were able to look at this huge landscape and all the shipwrecks here and see how they sunk and their relation to the nuclear blast in their positions on the seabed. The Navy transport Gilliam. This is a drawing from 1946 when the Navy divers dove on it right after it sank. It wasn't the intended target of Able, but the drop missed the Battleship Nevada, which and basically ended up flash milling Gilliam, and it sank in just a few minutes. Our map that shows a lot more information. It was not as structurally sound as the drawing made it look. It's actually severely damaged, and it kind of melted itself into one of these coral head craters, and it draped itself in there, which is you can see in the multi-beam sonar point cloud that we show here. So we're able to really take a good look at the morphology of these sites and what the impacts of the blast was. Similarly, on the pilot fish, the submarine, this is the outer skin of the sub that was basically shrink wrapped by the force of the blast around the ribs of the submarine. So the compression of that forced air out of the other side of it, and that's what actually sank the submarine. So it punched a hole in the stern, and it all rushed out the bow. We took a photo in the top left. This is a submarine on display at Pearl Harbor. And one of our divers squeezed his way into the torpedo room on the pilot fish and showed these are the two torpedo tubes. They were squished together. You can see you could stand in between the torpedo tubes in that photo, but inside the pilot fish, they've been shoved together by the force of the nuclear blast. So we've got to compare that to the USS Bowfin at Pearl Harbor. The largest and the most famous wreck at Bikini is the Saratoga, which is well documented, as this drawing shows by the National Park Service team in '89 and '90. But what this does, it makes a really good comparison to the wreck today. And we actually documented that the stern flight deck is deteriorating quite a bit, and it's rusting more and it's collapsing. particularly in that stern area. One of the theories is that the nuclear blast may have caused microfractures in the steel, which allows corrosion to be accelerated quite a bit. Also near near Saratoga are some of the aircraft that were on the flight deck when the blast went off to test the impact of the blasts on some vehicles, tanks, trucks, aircraft were on board. So this is one of the ones that was discovered, but there were a lot of these materials had never been found or documented. And so one of the objectives of doing this full lagoon mapping of Bikini is to try to find the rest of that debris and kind of finish what Crossroads started in determining the impact of these nuclear blasts on all this military and naval material. So if we take another look at our sonar map, you can see all these coral heads and the Baker craters in the middle. You can see the line of Saratoga just below the. So this is all the sonar data was processed to show change in slope. So bright colors, there's a strong change in slope, and blue is very flat. And so it reveals the morphology of the sediments within the crater, as well as the shipwrecks and the coral heads and the other things that are going on. And if you zoom into where Saratoga is, just below Saratoga, you see all these yellow dots. And that was just outside of where we had our scuba divers go, because we're focusing on the shipwreck. So we intend to go back at some point in the next few years and use an AUV probably to get better, closer up imagery of the lagoon bottom. And I'm pretty sure that this is going to be tanks and vehicles and mooring blocks and other aircraft that rolled off of the aircraft carrier when it was hit by the water from the nuclear blast and kind of tipped it over and they all fell off. So it's just more things that we're looking for to document, more of the archaeology of Bikini Atoll, an archaeology of the beginning of the Cold War. Another interesting thing about the shipwrecks at Bikini is they're also leaking oil. This is from the Japanese battleship Nagato, from a photo taken from a drone. Saratoga oil as well, and we think a couple of the other ones are. They were all given different amounts of oil to test the, how the nuclear blast affected a full ship versus an empty ship and that sort of thing. So there's documented levels of oil in these ships, so we know which ones had more, and Nagato and Saratoga had quite a bit. So further archaeological and environmental assessments and monitoring is warranted for us to document how this nuclear submarine battlefield looks today, and hopefully, like the Prince Eugen, which had been here but sank a couple islands over. Hopefully, we can continue to mitigate the threat while also preserving the historic sites that these are. I'm sure you guys all saw earlier in 2020. There was a discovery of the battleship USS Nevada off of Pearl Harbor. So this was the target of the Able drop, the nuclear bomb that was dropped from an aircraft over Bikini Atoll on the fleet first. It missed and it detonated over Gilliam instead. So Nevada never sank, but it was heavily irradiated. And so they towed it to Pearl Harbor, and then a couple years later they sank it by gunfire about 100 miles south of Pearl Harbor in like 3 miles of water. So we'd had a decent idea of where to search for it from the logbooks of the ships that sank it. And so we partnered with our friends at Ocean Infinity, who have a lot of 6,000 meter rated AUVs, and they they conducted a survey with the sonars. They covered about 100 square miles in a day. And we ended up finding the remains of the wreck. You can see on the bottom left is a sonar image, and there's a large object on the right, which is most of the ship. It's upside down, so we saw mostly the hull. But on the left, and that's the debris field. So what happened was it was sitting on the sea surface, and all these other ships were firing at it. destroyers. They were testing out some new guns. They ended up sinking with a torpedo because it just wouldn't sink. They fired a couple torpedoes at it, I think. And so the bow and the stern are missing. So the bow and the stern are in this other debris field, as well as parts of the superstructure that were blown off. The ship rolled over, so it capsized when it sank, because all battleships are top heavy, so they typically do that. The turrets, which are only gravity seated, they fell out, and that all sank, and that makes up this debris field. And then the rest of the hull kind of kited down like this, and so it impacted about 600 meters away from the rest of the debris. So this was a fascinating document because we had all these pieces of a battleship that were in one section, and the main hulk of it was in another. You can see there's the number 36, which is the Nevada's number on the bow. So we were able to, even though we knew it was here, we knew which one it was, we visually confirmed that this was in fact USS Nevada. And there's also, this is a tank that had been on board for the Crossroads test. So that some of the material, because it was all irradiated with the nuclear radiation, they didn't remove it. So this was some of the debris that was still on board. So in a way, we're continuing the process of finishing off what Operation Crossroads started. And as we looked at the debris field from this old battleship. And just kind of in closing, I want to remark that, World War II shipwrecks are passing their 75th anniversary over the course of the next couple of years. And the risks of oil leaks in places like Bikini Atoll and Truck Lagoon, Guadalcanal, the coast of the US and the Gulf of Mexico, in the English Channel, where a lot of World War I and II ships were sunk. It's all increasing, as corrosion continues in the marine environment. And so we're working with partners in ocean exploration and industry to develop new technology and methods to assess these shipwrecks, find them, document them, all in Deepwater, which makes everything much more challenging. But we've been going out there with a combination of private and federal partners to do a lot of this work. So I hope that this overview kind of got you excited about and showed you some of the stuff that we can do in Deepwater. And I hope you follow some of this stuff and continue to do more expeditions and get some of this stuff into the public eye. So I just want to thank everyone for watching.
Thank you, Mike. As a history nerd who grew up following the discovery of the Titanic, and I saw Ballard speak when I was in college, this was awesome. So it makes me think that we need to do a history of some of these ships that were discussed, because Nevada has a rich history from
absolutely
from being the one ship to get underway at Pearl Harbor, or I grew up in Sunnyvale where the Macon was based at Moffett Field. So I grew up seeing Hangar 1 every day. So again, just fantastic. So we have at least one question.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if we were able to do that.
We do. We have the technology.
Oh, good.
So, one question that came in is, approximately how long are you on site during a survey?
I mean, that matters, or that varies quite a bit. So the ROVs that we were doing, the very detailed surveys of like a shipwreck site, that's usually done in a couple of hours. The survey to find Nevada, we narrowed it down to a 10 by 10 mile area, which sounds huge, but it's actually pretty small when you're looking at the whole Pacific. That was done with an AUV in about a day. But sometimes, I mean, I've been offshore for 4 to 6 weeks at a time surveying an area. It kind of depends on the technology you're using and the size of it and the depth you need to go to. If you're towing something and you have to go deep, you can only go like one knot, so it can take quite a while.
So we have a Sea Scout has asked, what are the educational requirements to enter into the industry? Basically, how can he be you?
Yeah, so I have a master's and a PhD, and it takes a while to do. But you can do some underwater archaeology in college potentially. There's some schools that do it, like the University of West Florida or East Carolina University. They have programs in it, and some of them actually have field schools in how to excavate a shipwreck as a diver. I went more the earth sciences route, and so did oceanography and geology. But you know, it's quite a bit of schooling to get to where I am, but there's quite a bit that you can do on the way as well.
Fantastic. While others are coming in, what was your most memorable expedition that you've been on?
I would say that I was in the Black Sea in 2011, and that was when we found some of the wrecks that were heavily trawled that I was talking about. And that was when we did a sonar survey off a couple of these peninsulas and really just started finding a whole bunch of stuff. And it was really cool because a lot of them were just full of preserved timbers. Now they've been trawled, so they were kind of all over the place, but it was really interesting to document those, and we found quite a few wrecks. So that was a very memorable couple of weeks as we were surveying the northern coast of Turkey along the Black Sea.
Awesome. Similar question, what is your educational background and expertise needed to work on one of your projects?
Well, something else that I would say is, you know, as I talked about, Ballard kind of wanted to start bringing science and exploration to the public and particularly to students. So there are a lot of programs for getting on board some of these missions, and you can go to NOAA's Ocean Explorer page, and you can also go to Nautilus Live, and they have ways of getting internships and other ways of participating in person as well as online. So I don't think either ship's operating right now, but they will be coming this spring. And so I pay attention to those. There's a lot of ways to do that. But one thing that I will say, and I don't know if this is good advice or not, but a lot of people think you need to study math, and you do, of course. But I think the most valuable thing that you can learn to be in science or archaeology is actually writing. So pay attention in English class, because proposals and reports and papers are the way that you communicate and the way that you get funding to get to do these sorts of things. So you need to be able to write and express yourself and explain what you're talking about very clearly. So those English classes where they're teaching you punctuation and stuff, that's actually really important and probably the best skill that you can have to do science.
Great advice. Similar if you want to go to law school.
Or that, yeah.
Same advice. So we have a question about what happens with artifacts, and that is, who gets the artifacts when they're brought to the surface? Are you working with museums?
Yeah, so there's a lab there's a couple of labs. One's at the University of Texas A&M that conserve these artifacts. So they've been underwater for hundreds, even thousands of years. So you can't just bring them up and they're fine. They take a lot of care and careful chemical conservation sometimes in order to be displayed appropriately, and then they will be usually archived at a museum where they're sometimes displayed, sometimes just protected. But it goes through a very, very expensive and complicated process of conservation and curation before anybody can really see them on display.
Another question, how many people are in your field, and do other countries do similar expeditions?
I mean, there are quite a few people in the field. I don't know exact numbers. The US does have quite a few in terms of, you know, percentage of people who are doing this. But there's a lot of foreign countries who are really getting in the game. France was a co-partner on the discovery of Titanic, actually. So France has capabilities for a long time. There's a lot of exploratory technology coming out of Scandinavia, Russia, China, Japan, and like the Russians did an expedition to Titanic. Scandinavia is actually quite well versed in deep water work because of a lot of their wind farm and other energy developments. So yeah, deep water archaeology is not just an American thing.
Yeah. So we're also getting questions on Facebook where we're live streaming.
All right.
And one's very practical. What happens if a cable breaks or the rotor breaks?
Well, there are ways of getting it back. So we've had times where the ROV has gone completely dark. We've lost power, and it's positively buoyant. So it's just slightly positive. So it actually has to be thrusting to stay level, and so it will rise. Not to the surface because the other ROV's there, but it won't like impact the seabed and destroy something or itself. There was an instance back in the 80s where I think an ROV cable snapped and I believe they were able to go down with a spare ROV and retrieve it. So it's difficult and it's complicated, but usually they have the spare parts on board and the engineering minds to make things, to fix things and make things work again.
I would bet people get very creative very quickly when something like that happens. So another question on Facebook. How often do you locate sunken ships or artifacts?
How often do we locate sunken ships?
Yeah, and I think maybe giving this a little bit more context, if you're on a month-long expedition, how often, what's the rate of finding things on a...
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of empty seabed. Yeah, shipwrecks are few and far between, but research. So one of the things off of Turkey was we looked at where ancient ports were, so where ships were more likely to have been going, as well as the oceanographic parameters. There's areas where trawling has probably just removed stuff. There's areas of deep basins where sediments kind of pile in that would bury stuff, and we learned pretty quickly that those areas you're just not going to find anything, whether they were there or not. So it's kind of learning the landscape and learning the history, and kind of marrying those two things to get to understand where you have a likelihood of finding things.
Fantastic. So I think that is the end of the questions that have come in. I know there have been a lot of glowing comments on Facebook saying this is amazing, and people who have, one scout who recently got her scuba certification. So you definitely have inspired our youth and volunteers. So, one last question it looks like. Have you been to Truck Island?
No, I would love to. So Truck is a location where the Japanese in World War II had housed dozens of their oil tankers that were full. And there was a kind of a surprise attack by the US, and we sunk almost all of them. So there's a couple dozen of Japanese oil tankers down there. Also a huge pollution risk right now. And there are efforts to document how those wrecks are faring. But it's all fairly shallow water. So there's, just on a recreational side, there's some amazing diving. So very much like to go there, but more as on an academic side, I'd be very interested in seeing how those oil tankers are doing it, and maybe talk to some of the authorities about what it would take to get some of those cleaned up.
Fantastic. This has been just a ton of fun to hear your stories and see the material that you have. For everyone, we do have another, we have a GPS webinar on February 23rd. I'm posting the registration for that in chat right now and posting it also on Facebook for those who are watching there. And one of our volunteers did text right now that there is that the Poland did a survey of the wreck of the Graf Zeppelin in the Baltic, and there is a documentary on the Curiosity stream if you want to go check that out. And there's also a lot of good ones on Amazon Prime if you have a fix. And if there is a lot of interest, we'll do more of these. We can dip into history because there are a lot of us who do nerd out for history. So the final question, you're a Batman fan. What's your favorite Batman story?
How do you know that?
On your bio. So,
Apparently, it's all online now. What's the actual question?
what was your favorite Batman story?
Oh, I really liked The Long Halloween in the comics, and I would have to say the Dark Knight in film.
Fantastic. So, Michael, thank you for your time. Everyone who's
Yeah,
watching,
thank you for having me.
you're very welcome. This has been one of the best attended Zoom and Facebook Live webinars we've done. So, everyone, thank you
All right.
so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.